Welcome to Prepper Nation. I'm John. Thank you very much for being here, for hitting subscribe, doing all the YouTubey stuff. Truly appreciate this. So, the next phase of war is coming. Some people call it World War. Some people call it a wider war. That's being used a lot right now in mainstream media and coming out of the White House and stuff. We don't want a wider war. Are we seeing a wider war? Yada, yada, yada. So, this video is in response to a question that I received on Nation Plus by way of Patreon. That information is down below if you want to join Nation Plus. But whatever. The point is, they were talking about NATO and they were asking, is NATO asking people to get ready? Are they telling civilians to get ready? I guess there was a video at some point in time that popped up in the prepping community. And yes, that is absolutely true. I think there's several generals at the top of NATO, but I think the guy is Dutch. I don't remember his name right off, but I have seen the interview where he's telling people, preparing for war or some baseline of preparedness at this point is probably not a bad idea. He's saying peace, I can't quote him directly. I don't have it in front of me, but he's saying, he's not saying war is going to happen tomorrow, but eventually peace is not going to be an option. And they're talking specifically about Russia and all the stuff that's taking place in Europe. But I want to take it a step further this morning because it goes well beyond NATO and this singular interview that this guy did, this general did. So I want to take you to General Sir Patrick Sanders back on January the 24th. And I do have direct quotes from his. His was more of a compelling argument. This guy seems to get it more than the heads at NATO. And again, he's a general for the UK. Here's some direct quotes, and I'll explain each one. Whole of nation undertaking. So he is talking about here mobilizing in the UK into a full-blown war economy. When you mobilize into a war economy or a wartime stance or stature, you're basically saying war is coming and we need to solely focus on what is coming, right? No more, none of the nonsensical stuff. It's time to prepare for war. It's time to dig in. It's time that everybody pull their sleeves up and get to work on defending the UK is what he's saying. He believes the UK needs to move from post-war to pre-World War, again, with full mobilization. So what he's talking about here is post-war. The UK is not the only place here. The United States has been in a post-war attitude for a long time as well. A lot of our allies have. Meaning, we've just let the numbers in our military dwindle, and even though the funding is still there, the troop strength is no longer what it used to be. Like, if you're focused on war, you're focused on troop strength, you're focused on everything to do with the military. Post-war, like he is saying here, you kind of get away from that, and you're like, well, we can go ahead and scale down. I remember when the military was laying off, a couple of presidencies back. Y'all know who I'm talking about with that, but they were just laying off, and it wasn't a focal point anymore. And so he is saying with the UK, we need to get away from that attitude. We need to focus on the storm that is coming. He literally says, and I quote, "This is our 1937 moment." And that's probably the biggest reason that I chose to cover him versus NATO this morning. Again, General Sir Patrick Sanders of the UK, because this guy seems to get it. This is a 1937 moment, especially if you're in Europe. But I think across the world it really is. And he goes on to say within the next 3 years, he wants to bolster the UK's standing army up to 120,000 strong. So he wants to essentially double the troop strength. I think that's pretty much double what they have right now. That's not counting any kind of reserve army. He wants to fill in the reserve army ranks as well. He wants to create a civilian army, people that typically would not qualify for the standing army for home defense. He says this
specifically because he believes there's going to be a need for a civilian army at home, at some point. He's saying we got about 3 years before we need this to be locked in solid. And he goes on to say we need to specifically prepare for a land war or a land invasion. Um, and he didn't actually come right out and say it during this interview, but he hinted a couple times actually the idea of conscription. He made reference to right now it's voluntary whether or not you want to get into the military. He's saying that may not be an option moving forward, not with the kind of numbers that we're going to need. And I think this also plays into the United States because we're in the same boat. This is not me crapping on our military. I think we have an excellent military, best in the world, but our troop strength has went down. And so far with the recruiting efforts and stuff here in the United States, people just are not interested. That demographic that typically signed up, they're doing other things. And so we have a serious, serious problem if we're going to bolster our troop strength here at home. So this man seems to understand what is coming more so than any of the other interviews and military leaders that I've read. Certainly better than anything I've seen coming out of the Pentagon here in the United States. Now, our military leaders may understand this is coming as well, but they haven't said so. They haven't worded it so well. This guy understands what's coming. I think the timetable is correct. I think we have about 3 years before you know, all hell breaks loose worldwide. Before we begin to see that wider war, that world war, I think we have about 3 years, and he's dropping real talk. He's not beating around the bush. He's saying we have half as many troops as we're going to need. We're not fully mobilized, and we're not taking the threats seriously. And he's pleading with the UK and the government there. We need to take this threat seriously because while we have 3 years or so, and that may seem like a long time, in war, it's really not. You're going to need every single day moving forward to prepare for what's coming. So it just, to me, it's real talk, and the guy seems to have his head screwed on correctly. Um, but now we get into the United States because the idea of a wider war is very, very unpopular here in the United States. I mean, Biden and the Biden administration, Blinken and all them, they've actually come out and said they have no desire for a wider war. They're talking about the Middle East recently. We have no desire for a wider war, even though this week alone, Biden has bombed 3 different countries in the Middle East. So I know it comes as no surprise to anyone, but it seems like Biden is saying one thing and doing the total opposite. I know he has a tendency to do this. We don't want wider war. Boom, we're bombing everybody in sight over in the Middle East. We don't want to escalate things in Europe. Here, let's run 30,000 plus strong war games 20 miles from the border of our enemies. We don't want to escalate things in the Taiwan Strait. Here, let's have heads of states fly in to visit Taiwan and totally exclude China. And I mean, this is nothing new for Biden and his administration. They say one thing and they do the total opposite. But the issue is, if they do actually want a wider war, we have problems with that here in the United States, and a lot of those problems are very similar to the UK. Getting back to the point of this, elites seem to want a wider war, a world war. Elites seem to want one really bad. Um, who was it? Lindsey Graham yesterday was saying that the bombing of the 3 different countries in the Middle East, that's not going far enough. We need to go further. We need to put an exclamation point on things because he is a warmonger. This is another thing that I have against, not to get sidetracked here, but this is another thing I have against Nikki Haley. Not only is she in the weave's back pocket, but she is a warmonger. She will put us directly in World War III, and she don't have a problem telling you this. Elites want war because war is good for business. But the average American, I don't think they want war. Straight up. I mean, y'all let me know in the chat if I'm wrong on that, but I think the average conservative, the average independent, and the average liberal, they don't really want war because they understand, the troop strength and stuff, whether they admit it or not. They know we would get into conscription. I think a lot of liberals don't want that because a lot of liberals are within that cushy age of conscription and stuff like this. And I mean, the problem though is this is not the first time. In the past, there have been several instances where uh, I think elites have wanted a wider war, and it's just been a very unpopular deal throughout, the U.S. population. And every single time something happens, some huge event, I don't know, I guess you could say perhaps a false event happens. Um, it's debatable, but you look at the Second World War. The idea of America getting involved in World War II, believe it or not, folks, was very unpopular. Most of the people in the U.S. did not want that. Then Pearl Harbor happens, and all of a sudden, most Americans totally change their mind. They get on board with globalists. Yes, you were right all along. Let's go to war, right? A wider war in the Middle East was very unpopular throughout the United States of America, right? The concept of going to war and having a 20-year war in the Middle East, but elites wanted it. The next thing you know, the towers fell. And now all of a sudden everybody is ready to go to war. So I think, personal opinion on my part this morning, I think that card is going to be played very soon. I don't know how and I don't know where, but I think that the one thing elites have to change before this thing becomes, on a grand scale, they have to change the minds and opinions of many Americans. They have to find a way to somehow get Americans on board with funding a wider war because they're getting a lot of pushback right now. We just saw this with the spending bill. Americans are pissed over it, and they should be. And then also the idea of conscription ain't going to be very popular because people don't even understand what they're fighting for. So certainly a wider war is coming. I'll say that this morning. And all of the involved seem to know it. Think about this for a second. Put your thinking caps on here for a minute and really absorb this, what I'm about to say, okay? When you get into the idea, the quote, diversity is our strength. People are going to feel however they want to feel on that quote. Diversity is our strength. But we only hear this quote and we only see this push for diversity and this flooding of massive amounts of people that weren't here yesterday, but look, they're here now. This multicultural melting pot. We only see this with the U.S. and its allies. Anybody that we look at as an enemy, getting this back and forth of China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, you're not seeing that quote, diversity is our strength. You're not seeing this big push to flood those countries because they don't seem to want to allow it. So the United States and its allies, I think, are being weakened on purpose, and our enemies are watching this happen. And our enemies are preparing for this wider war as well. You'll hear a lot and you'll see a lot in chats. These people are here because liberals need voters, right? And maybe that's the case. I'm not going to sit here and say that's wrong, but I think it goes beyond that. I think it goes beyond liberals need voters. I think our enemies, and I don't know this to be for sure, but it's a gut feeling. I think our enemies have infiltrated some of the lawmakers and some of the processes here in the United States,
and our allies. I'm talking about Australia. I'm talking about Germany. I'm talking about, the UK. They've infiltrated the US and its allies, and they're allowing this diversity is our strength argument to happen so they can put people in certain places and staging for war would be a way to put it. So just something to keep in mind before we close it down. A wider war that is going to happen will not be exclusive on TV. This is not going to be Vietnam. It's not going to be a situation, I think, where we're able to sit down, turn on the TV, and see the war reports happening halfway around the world, kind of like we're doing right now. I don't think that's going to be the case. When this thing goes wide scale, I believe we're going to see chaos here at home because I think a lot of these people are being staged for this very purpose right now in the United States, in the UK, in Canada, again in Australia. All of the heavy hitting allies are having to deal with this um, huge influx of migration all of a sudden, and I believe we'll see the chaos here at home, and I believe anyone that thinks wider war isn't coming at this point, I mean, you're just living in straight up denial. I don't mean to offend you or anything, but I don't understand the thought process at this point when you have NATO obviously prepping for a wider war, telling civilians you might want to get prepared when you have military commanders in the UK begging and pleading the government to prepare and to mobilize and to try and warn citizens when you have all this chaos taking place. Again, we just bombed 3 countries in the Middle East in 1 week. Um, I don't know how you can't see that a wider war is coming. But I don't know. People think in different ways, I guess. Y'all take care, and Godspeed.